This is my 100th video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge and I didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also see my lengthy series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller scale trains running. 100th video in this series, something of a milestone, and I'm afraid it's going to be a doozy, as this one is dedicated to another build of a Superquick card kit, and this time it's what you might call the granddaddy of Superquick kits, the most large and complex of all, well, at least the largest and most complex that I've done. So it's going to be a long one, and obviously only really very relevant to someone thinking of using this kit themselves. For perspective, it actually took me around 4.5 days to build this kit, so if I'd actually shot my building of the kit in real time, this video would be something over 24 hours in length. This is not one that you can expect to put together in an afternoon. I was building this kit for the station at the far end of my shelf layout. I had a paper template in place indicating the approximate footprint that I expected the buildings to take, and I'd use this when laying my tracks. I was intending to use Hornby plastic platforms, and I had these prepared and in place, except that I expect to be adding 1 or 2 more platform roof sections. This is the Superquick kit as it comes. Pretty much the same packing as all Superquick kits, although the extra weight of this one might serve as warning that it's going to be a bit larger and more complex. When you unpack the kit, this is what you get. 2 triply folded sheets of printed card parts, 2 sheets of paper parts not pre-cut, 1 sheet of clear acetate glazing parts, and a paper sheet with instructions and diagrams, and of course the packaging itself, the sheet at top and a bag. The instructions on the sheet with the diagrams start at number 8, and I was initially confused as to where the rest of the instructions were. I thought perhaps something had been omitted from the kit, but then I realised that the first part of the instructions was printed on the back of the packing sheet that came stapled to the top of the bag. I've built quite a number of Superquick kits, and this is the first time I've encountered instructions like this. But then this kit probably needs more instructions than most. As is usual with Superquick kits, the instructions are heavily verbal and in English only. If you can't read English well, I can't see how you'd manage to build one of these kits, as they're far from simple, and the diagrams alone would not be enough for you to figure out how to assemble things. Here's the other side of those 2 sheets. The packing sheet includes a couple of pictures of the assembled building, which is definitely useful during assembly. The other instruction sheet has several diagrams illustrating some of the more tricky aspects of the assembly. Here's the first of the 2 sheets of printed card parts. As is usual with Superquick kits, the parts are printed right up against each other and sometimes inside each other, so trying to figure out where one part ends and another begins is a major puzzle in itself. In general, it's fairly safe to say that the individual parts don't go across the major folds in the sheets, so the 2 triply folded sheets in this kit essentially constitute 6 sheets, although I'm not sure that you can 100% rely on that with all Superquick kits, but if the folded sheets are only held together at their edges, it should be quite safe to separate them. This is the first subsheet from which the instructions ask us to remove parts. The instructions in this kit generally refer to the parts by numbers as well as names, which is helpful as the numbers can generally be found printed on the parts sheet, confirming that you've got the right part, or at least you've found it. Locating its edges can be more difficult. You can see the numbers together with the part names here. The first parts to be assembled are for the main platform section, which is referred to as the Concourse. Here are the parts for the platform surface and the walls. The tab along the front edge of the platform is folded back and glued down. The Superquick parts are made from card faced with paper, which does tend to warp a lot, and folding back tabs helps to straighten out the parts. The front wall is then glued behind the folded tab. The straight edge of the wall should take out any remaining warp in the platform. Spacers are then glued under the platform behind the front wall. Then the back walls are folded up and glued to the spacers. There are then 3 more parts that fit in under this main platform. A diagram is provided to illustrate how these are supposed to go, which certainly helps. Essentially, the 2 wider parts have short end sections that fold round and glue behind the thinner straight part. Then that assembly is fitted in under the platform between the 2 back walls. Next to be assembled are 2 short platform sections which will go at right angles to the concourse platform on either side of the tracks for a terminus station. This kit can also be assembled as a through station, in which case the platforms all go in a single straight line and the buildings go along the back of this, but I was aiming for assembly in the terminus configuration. These 2 platforms are assembled similarly to the concourse, with a front wall glued behind a folded tab and the back wall folded up and glued to spacers. So now we have the 3 platform sections included in this kit. It could be combined with other Superquick kits for platforms, but I was intending to use it with Hornby plastic platforms. Next we assembled the wings of the main building, the 2 sections that will form the 2 sides of the main building. This is the part for the first wing. I actually managed to separate all of the parts from the sheet without making any mistakes when building this kit. Well, I didn't cut anything apart that should have been together. I did realise here that this was actually supposed to be 2 separate parts, not just one, although they're both part of the same wing. I tried to sort out how the folds of the first part were supposed to go. Here's the glazing sheet that came with this kit. Typically for Superquick, the parts are printed very close together, as if acetate was extremely expensive stuff. The instructions say to use sticky tape to attach the glazing. I always ignore this and glue it in place with rocket glue, but the very narrow margins make this difficult. They'd make attaching it with sticky tape difficult too. I thought at first I was going to have trouble figuring out which glazing part was which, but then I realised that there was a key at the corner of one of the paper parts sheets, top left here. Parts for the curtains are also on this sheet, keyed by the same letters as the corresponding glazing parts. I took the platforms up to the layout at this point, as I wanted to see how they would fit, whether they corresponded to my paper template and how they would go together with the Hornby platforms. There was no major issue with the size of the platforms, but they were quite a bit lower than the Hornby platforms, which was going to require some fiddling when it came to putting things together at the end. I left off gluing the short platform sections to anything until the very end so that I could manage the integration with the Hornby platforms. Here are the first 2 glazing parts and their corresponding curtains. As noted, I glued the glazing parts behind the window openings. Then I glued the curtains behind the glazing. I noticed afterwards that there was an instruction printed on the paper parts sheet saying to cut out the black sections of the curtain parts, but I didn't greatly regret not having done this. It's not really useful to look inside the card buildings, as the insides are not generally at all finished. Once the windows are glazed, this building section can be folded to shape and glued. The tab glues back, and then the ceiling section folds back and fits on top of the tab, holding the walls to shape. The sections for the bookstall need to be cut and folded back. I wasn't entirely clear why the white section was there and what I was supposed to do with it. There is a card former that glues under the lower sections, making 2 of them horizontal, with the middle section sloped between the 2 horizontal sections. I folded the white section back and glued it. Then there is a paper part that is folded and glued behind. This is the result from the front, with the card sections folded and the paper back piece glued in place. So here is what we now have for this section seen from the inside. You can see the backing piece for the bookstall there. And here seen from the side that will face the concourse platform. This part will form the 4th wall of that building section on the street side. Its window blanks need to be removed with careful cutting to free them. Then the windows need to be glazed and curtained. Not all of the windows are curtained with this kit, which makes sense for a railway station. Here's that part with the windows done. Next up was a very tricky part, making up stonework for the gables from paper parts. These parts don't come pre-cut, so you need to cut them out yourself, the way porcupines make love, very carefully. Here's one of those stone sections cut out as best as I could do it. Above you can see the diagram illustrating how the ends of these paper parts are supposed to be folded and glued. The ends are folded and glued as per the diagram, and the whole thing is glued to the top of the card part aligned with the top of the gable. This was extremely fiddly and I wasn't all that happy with my result. Then there are card strips that glue down on top of the gables and on top of the paper stonework at each side. Finally, the end wall is glued to the main part of the wing, with the wing side walls slotting in behind the paper stonework and the tabs on the gable wall folding round the outside of the main wing walls. Here's the view of that from the other side, and that was the way I glued it. First one side, then the other side. Now we have one wing of the main building essentially fully assembled. There's a single roof for the whole main building, so that can't be fitted until after both wings are assembled with the centre. Here's that assembled wing from the platform side. Next, the other wing of the main building is assembled pretty much in the same way as the first wing, but with some slight differences, as there's a ladies' room instead of the bookstall. There is a separate door part for the ladies' room, which needs to be glazed and then glued in place. Here's the second wing with its various door and window parts. Note that the letters indicating which glazing and curtain parts are to be used are printed on the window blanks, so you don't just want to take the window blanks out and throw them away without noting the proper letter key for the glazing. Here's that section with its door and window parts glued in place. It's folded round the same as the first wing, with the ceiling part folding up inside and holding the walls in place. This second wing has a gable wall the same as the first wing. Again, this is glazed and curtained based on the letter keys from the window blanks. And again, we have to do the whole fiddly business with the paper stonework, gluing it in place flush with the top of the gable, and folding round and gluing the end sections. Then, as for the first wing, the gable wall glues to the other walls, with the side walls slotted in under the paper stonework and the tabs on the gable wall glued outside the side walls. These are the parts for the street side entrance, which forms the central section of the main building on the street side between the two wings. Some parts for use later are embedded in these parts, and these need to be taken out and set aside, the way out door 39, the ramp 40, and the corner strengtheners, which are in the window openings. Here are the parts for the entrance cleared and folded. The grey entrance facing is glued in the centre of the entrance backing. The windows are glazed using the parts keyed by the letters on the corner strengtheners that came out of those windows. These are the parts for the lobby that goes in inside the street side entrance doors, a paper part that needs to be folded and a card floor. The paper part is folded in and out to form the lobby. I glued the paper part around the card floor. Wrongly, as it turned out. You have to be careful. Apart from the instruction sheets themselves, extra instructions are written here and there on the parts sheet. I missed the instruction on the parts sheet saying that the floor should be glued at the level of the black line, and I just glued it at ground level, so I had to take off the walls and re-glue them to the floor in the correct place. That lobby then glues in behind the entrance doors. I was now at instruction 5, and I read it repeatedly, struggling to understand it, especially as regards how the wings are supposed to glue to the entrance. The instruction does say to try it and only glue the parts when you're sure you've figured it out. Basically, the entrance fits inside the fronts of the wings, with the ends of the extended walls of the entrance resting on the tabs at the corners of the outer wing walls, as seen here. You can also see more clearly here how the lobby was glued in behind the door. I glued the entrance first to one wing and then to the other, resulting in the street side looking like this. This is what the main building looked like from the track side at this point. Now the concourse platform is glued across between the two wings. These are the parts for the booking office: walls, former and roof. I didn't want the BR poster on the front of the booking office as I'm modelling the LMS in the 1930s, so I stuck an LMS poster from trackside signs on the front of the booking office, hiding the original poster. The booking office walls are glued around the former. Then the roof is glued on and the booking office is glued to the back of the concourse platform. It just vaguely goes in the middle. There are no marks showing where it should go. Next to be assembled is the main concourse canopy. This is the main part for the sides of that. All of the bottom tabs, which are cut from the edge of the parts sheet, are folded back and glued. Then the 4 side sections are folded back, and the end ones are held in place at right angles by gluing corner strengtheners into the corners above the tabs. Now the back of the canopy needs to be attached. I wasn't at all clear what was going on with those funnily shaped bits that are folded back. I still don't understand what was going on with them. Perhaps they were supposed to be removed, but then why put them there in the first place? The back glues to the end of the side wall against the tab. I glued one corner first, then the other. Then the top sides are supposed to fit into the grooves in the back, but I can't see at all what was supposed to happen with the funnily shaped folding bits. I glued the top side walls to those. The funnily shaped bits aren't shown at all in the diagram. They were quite handy to reinforce the attachment of the top sides, but then they stuck up above the sides and got in the way of where the roof needed to be fitted. So at this point I cut the tops off them. These are the parts for the main canopy roof, a central section and 2 side sections, each with a corresponding glazing part. I glued the glazing parts to the back of the roof parts. I found it helpful to first fix the glazing in place with spots of glue and then add more glue along the edges to firmly hold the glazing in place. The side roofs are glued on flush with the back. Then the central roof is glued on level with the side roofs at the front and so overhanging a bit at the back. I scored the glazing part before trying to fold the central roof. Finally, a strut piece is folded double and glued in the centre, pressing up against the glazing. Here is the completed main canopy. That canopy is then glued to the back walls of the wings across the concourse. It's rather hard to get it to sit level as it tends to sag away from the wall under its own weight. There are supports for the front of it, but the instructions say not to fit these if you're making a terminal station. Here's a more natural view of the track side at this point. This part is for the valence of the canopy over the street side entrance. Its centre tab is folded back and glued, a bit tricky to do being such a thin tab. Then the side sections fold back and are held in place with corner strengtheners glued over the tab. This then glues in place over the entrance between the 2 wings, but I needed to trim this side as it didn't fit right. I glued the ends and held them until the glue set. Rocket glue will hold most joints after 30 seconds, and even a stressed joint after a couple of minutes. With the valence glued in place, roof sections needed to be fitted over it. The side sections are recessed at the back to fit around the wing walls. Then the centre roof section folds and fits in the middle. These are the parts for the street side entry steps. I was a bit concerned as to how the building would fit on my shelf layout, so I took it to the layout at this point to try it. I was thinking that I could omit the steps if they caused a problem, as that side really isn't going to be seen. As it turned out, the canopy stuck out further than the steps, so if anything, the canopy would have been removed, but actually the building seemed to fit okay, so long as I had the canopy right up against the end wall. I took the building back to the bench and fitted the steps. At this point I had completed all of the instructions on the back of the packing sheet, and I now moved on to the instructions on the separate paper sheet with the diagrams on the other side from the instructions. This side also had a plan showing how the building sections assembled for a terminus station, seen at the bottom here under the instructions. The next thing to be worked on was the main roof, quite a bit of work in itself. This is the main card part for that roof. All of the waste needs to be removed and separations made where needed to allow for folding. The parts sheet had indicated which side of the roof was which. I marked it on the back with pencil just in case there was confusion. Here is the roof tentatively folded, indicating how it will go together. The black section in the middle needs to be freed and folded down. This is where the dormer window will go. Here's the diagram provided to illustrate roof assembly. There are 4 formers, 2 for the main roof and 1 for each wing section. First, the main formers are glued in place, establishing the angle of the centre section of the roof. Then the wing formers are glued in place, establishing the angles of those sections. Here is the instruction covering the assembly of the main roof. Quite complex, and frankly there are things that should be there that are missing. The wing sections fold down and glue along their 2 inner edges to the central section. In this pic I've glued the section at left, and you can see how the section at right will fold down and glue similarly. The instructions suggest gluing folded slips of paper inside the joins between the centre roof and the wings. I've cut a suitable size slip of paper and folded it. Then I glued that slip of paper over the join in the roof. This will definitely help to strengthen that join. Then I did the other side the same way, glued it first, then glued on a strip of paper to strengthen. So here is how the main roof looked at this point. The instructions say to apply the ridge tiles and gutters at this point. For the ridge tiles, no instructions are given beyond just apply ridge tiles. These are the paper parts for the ridge tiles and gutters. Note that there are some instructions for these printed on the paper parts sheet itself. As indicated by those instructions, I pricked through the sheet with the point of my knife at all of the places marked Z, and then turned over the sheet and scored on the back between those Z positions. That's for the folding of the ridge tiles. Then I cut out all of the ridge tile pieces for the main roof, the orange-coloured ones. I coloured all of the edges of the ridge tiles with a brown marker, as they look bad if left white. Then I folded all the ridge tiles along the score line using a metal ruler. The ridge tiles fitted without a problem except for the sections for the centre top. These were shorter than the corresponding roof sections. There was nothing in the instructions about this. I fitted the short sections on the outside, which turned out to be wrong, necessitating a recovery strategy later. These are the parts for the gutters. Honestly, I hate doing Superquick gutters, but I do them as I suppose they do add to the look of the roof. The parts need to be scored and cut out. All of the funny-shaped ends need to be carefully formed with a sharp knife. Then the black sections need to be folded double and glued back. After doing this, the gutters look pretty bad with large white edges showing and dotted lines visible. so they all need to be manually coloured black. I was careful not to colour the tabs, as there was printing on those indicating where each section went. The tabs then need to be bent up away from the gutters, as these tabs need to glue under the edges of the roof. Here are all of the gutters glued in place as seen from inside the roof. And here's the outside. Here you can see the rest of the gutters on the other side of the roof. Next, the dormer window needs to be assembled. Here are the parts for that. The window is glazed and curtained, and then the sides of the dormer are folded and glued around the card former. The dormer then glues into place in the roof, with the black section folded down behind it. At the front is the part for the dormer roof. The instructions say to dampen the back of this and then curve it to fit over the dormer. I did my best with this, got a bit of a mark on it trying to hold it in place. At this point the roof can finally be fitted to the building. It needs to slide in rather awkwardly under the stonework on top of the gables and to fit behind the top of the canopy on the platform side. Here's a view of the street side with the roof in place. It was at this point that I realised I'd glued the central ridge tile sections on wrongly. They should have been up against the central hole where the clock tower will go, to leave space at the ends for the chimneys, so I did my best to rip them off. These are the paper parts for the clock tower, a tricky assembly in itself. This is the main clock tower part cut out. These parts are not pre-cut, so you need to carefully cut them out yourself with a very sharp knife. These are card parts that will be used as packing on the clock tower. Here are the clock tower packing parts separated. The 4 large packing pieces are glued over the indicated positions at the bottom of the paper part. The instructions say to introduce curves into the upper paper sections by rolling them with a pencil or similar. This was not easy to do, but I did my best. The main part of the tower is folded round and the tab is glued inside. Because they're only paper, the tower walls don't stay straight well. Now the tabs on the ends of 2 of the top sections are glued inside. Actually, I beg your pardon, it's really only one section, isn't it? I'm pressing the tab in place with tweezers as I can't get my finger in there. Next, this card shaper is found, and finding parts is a whole game in itself. The card shaper is glued up inside the tower to hold the walls apart evenly and to form the curve of the top. The other 2 top sections are now folded down and glued to the outside of the walls. This produces a rather approximate top shape, which you are supposed to attempt to trim later after the glue has set thoroughly. Since the tower top needed to be left for a while, I turned my attention to the chimneys. These are the card parts for the chimneys, which are otherwise mainly paper. The card chimney bases fold around the formers and glue. With 2 card chimney bases made at left here, I turn to the paper parts for the chimneys seen at right. Again, these need to be very carefully cut out. It's best to score all of the fold lines before cutting out the parts. The paper chimneys fold around and fit into the card bases. I found it extremely hard to get the grey and black parts at the top of the chimneys to go together. This paper part is intended as a cover for the card base. First it is scored and cut out. Then the paper covers are glued around the chimney bases. I struggled with these chimneys and I wasn't very happy with how they turned out. Back to the clock tower. The instructions suggest trimming the top with scissors after the glue has dried. I tried using surgical scissors. I also snipped off some bits with nail clippers. I wasn't terribly happy with how the top of the tower turned out, but this was the best that I could do. The smaller card packing pieces are glued to the tower just below the top. There are then paper parts that need to be scored and cut out to fold around the tower. This larger paper part glues around the packing pieces at the bottom of the tower. Then there is a smaller paper moulding part. This glues around the packing pieces at the top of the tower. The chimneys glue down to the roof at the ends of the top ridge. I'm afraid mine ended up rather cockeyed. I then used some ridge tiles that I had left over from Metcalf kits on the top ridge between the chimneys and where the clock tower was going. Metcalf often give you a whole sheet of these ridge tiles with a kit, so I have lots of them around, fortunately for this situation. The clock tower then inserts into the hole in the middle of the roof. Here's a picture without flash, giving a better idea of the natural appearance. I noticed that the wing ridge seen at right here was out of place, and I re-glued it to the front wall under the stonework after this. Here's where I'd got to at this point. The small platform sections were not glued in place as I wanted to take care fitting these to harmonise with the Hornby platforms. This is the part for the walls of one of the two side buildings. These are rectangular sections which will go beside the main building on either side, with either their short side or their long side against the main building, depending on whether a through station or a terminal station is being built. The windows are cleared and the folds eased. The end tab is folded back and glued, and the windows are glazed. I got thoroughly confused by that central square section. The instructions said to fold it back, but along which edge should it fold? It looked to me as though the top edge was the least cut through, so I initially cut through the other edges and folded it back along the top edge, but then that didn't look at all right. So I taped it back on and folded it down, but that didn't look right either. So I folded it to the left side, but as it turned out it was supposed to be folded to the right side, the one side that I didn't try. Anyway, the building walls fold round and glue at the corner by the tab, and that folding wall glues to the back, although I've got it on the wrong side. This small floor support is folded and glued flush to the bottom of the walls in the corner. Then the floor part is glued in, resting on that support in the corner and up against the bottom of the folded back wall, which is on the wrong side. Here's the floor seen through the opening. There was then a part that folded in the middle and was supposed to make up the back and left inside walls here, but I'd glued the folded wall back on the left, so I cut this part in half, actually it was already falling apart at the fold anyway, and glued the back section of that to the back. Then I glued the other section of that part, which was supposed to go on the left, to the right. So I'd basically switched the right and left walls. Basically it worked fine, even though I did things wrong. The sort of dotted edge that you can see at the back left here was where that part was supposed to fold, but I cut off the piece that attached there and glued it on the other side. I don't think this will be at all noticeable when things are finished. Next, there is a canopy that is supposed to stick out over the platform from one end of this building. Here are the parts associated with that. The valence tab is folded back and glued, and the glazing part is glued in. The valence sides then fold down and glue into the corners by the tab. There is a positioning tab that folds down to locate this part relative to the building walls. This didn't want to stay folded down properly, so I stuck it in place by supporting it with a bit of waste card. The positioning tab then fits between the main walls, and the ends of the valence sides hold the canopy up at an angle, with the end valence side fitting into the groove at the corner of the building. I wasn't initially clear where to fit this canopy and had to carefully inspect the pictures of the finished building to figure out and be sure of getting it in the right position. The back of the canopy only covers part of the top of the building. This part is used to cover the rest of the building top. Again there is a positioning tab that folds down, and again I held it in place with a piece of scrap card. This piece needs to fit over the rest of the top of the side building. For a terminus station, the corner of this piece needs to be cut out so it can fit around the main building, as at back left here. There is a white section marked on the part for this cutout, but I found that I needed to cut out a little more than the white marked section for a proper fit. This piece is then glued to the top of the side building walls up against the back of the canopy part and located between the walls by the locator tab. This is the part for the roof of that building. It tended to warp quite badly. I folded it and glued the edges, but then it really didn't want to sit down flat because of the warping. You can see how it's rising up from the surface in the middle. It's supposed to sit flat. I forced it to glue flat to the top of the building, but the warp tried hard to push it off in the middle, and I had to re-glue it. The other side building is made up pretty much the same way, with minor differences, basically so that it can have a parcels and left luggage office rather than a way out. Here are all of the parts for this second side building. The tab is glued back and the windows are glazed. This time I managed to fold back the square cut out along the correct edge. The walls glued together in the same way as the other side building, with a folding wall glued to the back. The floor support glues into place in the corner, and the floor is glued in place. This floor is slightly oddly printed. A folding interior wall part fits around the printed pattern on the floor, with tabs at either end gluing flat against the walls. This produces the recessed counter for the luggage office. The canopy is glazed and the valence tab glued back. The valence sides are folded down and glued at the corners. Then the canopy is glued to the end of the walls. Again, the second part is trimmed to fit around the corner of the main building. I based this on trying the fit against the main building. And this part is then glued in place on top of the walls. Then the roof is made up, again bent due to warping. I did my best to force the roof down flat on top of the building, but it was rather a struggle. The very last building section to be made up is a way out passageway. Here are the main parts for that. The window is glazed, the door is glued in place, and the floor section is cut loose and folded back. The walls are then folded round and connected by gluing the tab inside with the folded floor back horizontal. Next, a part for the ramp is folded and glued under the floor part. This creates a sloped walkway inside. Here are the parts for the roof of the way out. The roof folds and glues together rather oddly, with the top section folded down and the bottom section folded up. The card former is then glued inside to set the angle of the roof. The roof is then glued on top, flush at the back, as it has to go against the wall of the building at that end. There is a small valence that glues under the roof outside the door. I was puzzled at first why this door was labelled no admittance, but it would be because this was a way out coming directly from the platform, and entry to the station was not allowed this way, though you'd think that would be rather hard to police. There are more ridge tiles for the black roofs and canopies, grey ones, perhaps more leading than tiles. These need to be scored along the back just like the orange ridge tiles. Then they need to be cut out. These are the sections for the way out roof. I glued these in place. They fitted well. There was one straight piece for the canopy over the entrance. The rest of these pieces were intended for the roofs of the side buildings. It was a bit confusing figuring out how they were supposed to go. The two pieces at right must have been meant for the central ridges, one for each roof, and the other pieces must have been meant for the corner ridges, 4 for each roof, just based on the number of them. The pieces for the corner ridges didn't really fit. They fitted well at the top, but as they came they just stuck right off the building at the bottom, as seen here. I trimmed the ends to fit with the corners of the roof. It was a bit fiddly to do this. I basically had to hold each piece in place and then mark with a pencil where the walls came to at the corner. Then I cut down the end based on my pencil marks. Here are both side buildings with all of their roof tiles or leading or whatever in place. I had forgotten to do the banding for the chimneys. Again, this was paper that needed to be scored and cut out, producing 2 wide band pieces and 2 narrow band pieces. I coloured the edges of the pieces with a brown marker as the white edges looked bad. I glued these bands around the tops of the chimneys. I'm not very happy with these paper pieces on the roof, but this was the best I could do, and hopefully they won't look too bad from a normal distance in natural light. Finally, I wanted to sort out the fit of the side buildings and the small platforms and how they could go together with my plastic Hornby platforms. I tried one side building against the main building and concourse with its small platform. I did this on a piece of foam board as that was flatter than my cutting mat. The Hornby platforms were quite a bit higher than the Superquick platforms. Also, the connecting tabs on the ends of the Hornby platforms prevented them sitting up against the Superquick parts. I used a cutting disc in a rotary tool to cut off the connecting tabs on the ends of the Hornby platforms where they needed to fit up against the Superquick parts. I glued the side building in place against the end of the concourse platform. Then I marked where the top of the Hornby platform came against the end wall with everything pressed down flat on the ground. Then I glued the short Superquick platform in place against the side building at an angle so that it sloped up from the concourse platform to the Hornby platform. I thought that this was the simplest solution and wouldn't look too bad. The only other plan I could think of was to raise the whole Superquick structure a bit by fitting something underneath it. I did the same on the other side, first fitting the side building to the end of the concourse platform, then cutting the tabs on the end of the Hornby platform off and gluing the small Superquick platform in place, sloped up from the concourse platform to the Hornby platform. The result wasn't ideal, but I thought I could live with it. Finally, the way out passage was glued up against the wall of the building that had the way out entry on the platform. So there's everything finally all glued together. There were barrier pieces, and the instructions suggested that these could be glued along the front edge of the concourse for a terminus station. You can see the barrier pieces at front here, and you can see that they would fit along the front of the concourse, but I didn't really think they would improve things, and they weren't in evidence on any of the pictures that I could find of a completed version of this kit, so I left them off, at least for now. I took the building and fitted it on the layout. I aligned the Hornby platforms with the Superquick assembly as best as I could. I think the result is quite acceptable. Some parts are really nice, other parts are a bit iffy. I did try to colour the more obvious edges, etc., but only where they could be seen with my placement on the layout. I'm not sure how well the Hornby platform roofs integrate, but I think I'm going to keep them, and indeed add more. The platforms fitted okay around the tracks. When you look really closely like this, you can see that the short Superquick platforms slope awkwardly and don't quite meet the ground or the Hornby platform properly, but I don't think that's going to be really noticeable. If I do keep noticing it, I'll try to do something about it. I pulled trains into the station to make sure that things worked and to check how they looked. I quite like the look of the station with the trains. It's a pity about the bad joins in the backdrop. I'll have to think about that. If I could hide where the hills join, the sky might not draw much attention. In general, I don't regret having gone with this kit for this station.